Diolch yn fawr.
Thank you very much, Llywydd, and I move the motions on the order paper. This is the second plenary debate during stage 1 of the Senedd proceedings on the Welsh Language and Education Wales Bill. And today's debate happens following scrutiny work by 3 Senedd committees and the evidence presented by a number of individuals and organisations who are interested in the bill. I am very grateful to the chairs and members of the Children, Young People and Education Committee, the Legislation, Justice and Constitution Committee, and the Finance Committee for the reports that they have produced and are now available to members. Those reports are particularly useful to members as we make a decision in the Senedd today. At the end of stage 1, you are asked to agree to the general principles of the bill and to allow it to progress to stage 2. Essentially, the bill exists to support the Senedd's ambition for the Welsh language. It changes the way in which the Welsh language is planned and provided in the education system so that every pupil becomes an independent Welsh language user and a confident Welsh language user by the end of compulsory schooling. The bill was developed during the period of the cooperation agreement, and the substance of the bill continues to emerge from the work that was done jointly between Welsh Government and Plaid Cymru. And I remain grateful for the contribution made by the designated members in the work of drawing up the bill. So the first recommendation of the Children, Young People and Education Committee is that the Senedd does agree the general principles of the Welsh Language and Education Wales Bill. And I'm extremely grateful to the committee and the committee chair, Buffy Williams, for making that recommendation at the very beginning of their report. Now, Llywydd, it is almost 12 years since I, as the responsible member, helped to take legislation through the Senedd for the first time in a process that we were all growing familiar with at that time. And during that whole period, more than a decade now, I don't believe that any bill hasn't been improved by the scrutiny process, and this bill is no exception. Although I am very grateful to the committees for their general support during stage 1 and very much hope that the Senedd will follow that advice this afternoon, I do want to use the rest of my contribution to look forward by setting out what the government intends to do in response to the recommendations in the committee reports on improvements that can be made to the bill. I have already written to the chair of each of the committees responding to each of the recommendations. I will now highlight 6 of the most pressing issues. So if the bill is to succeed, then we must ensure that there is capacity within the education system to implement it. This was a theme consistently raised during stage 1, the need for a workforce which has the capacity to deliver the new steps set out in the bill. Yesterday, the Cabinet Secretary for Education, Lynn Neagle, published a statement on the work that has commenced in drawing up an education workforce plan for Wales, and that plan will include the teaching of Welsh and teaching through the medium of Welsh. But, as the Children, Young People and Education Committee's report suggests, this workforce plan goes beyond the bill alone and encompasses the development of the education workforce more generally. For the specific purposes of this bill, I intend to introduce an amendment at stage 2 in order to place a duty on Welsh ministers to set out in the national framework the steps that will be taken to ensure that there is an adequate workforce developed in order to teach through the medium of Welsh. Now, alongside the workforce issue, there is the issue of workload. An assessment of the impact on workload will have been updated and will be published at the end of stage 2 proceedings, and that will be steered by the evidence provided by the committees and further discussions with teaching unions and others. The term Welsh education was a cause of concern for some respondents. The government will create a further version of the explanatory memorandum as the bill proceeds through the Senedd process in order to provide greater clarity on this particular issue. And today I can confirm that the purpose of the bill includes teaching Welsh as a subject and also providing education and training through the medium of Welsh, and to provide further assurances, as some respondents have requested, amendments will be tabled at stage 2 in order to confirm the importance that the Welsh Government continues to place on increasing the percentage of pupils who receive their education in mainly Welsh language schools. The Children, Young People and Education Committee also asked that we consider how much Welsh education would be provided in each of the school language categories established by the bill. That will be a matter for regulations to confirm and for the consultation process that will be required for those regulations. However, I have been persuaded by the conclusions of the committee that it would be useful to provide more detail on the likely range of language provision that we anticipate that we would want to consult on, and we will add that information as we update the explanatory memorandum and the statement of policy intent. And finally, I will also be introducing amendments to ensure that the national framework includes tertiary education. The explanatory memorandum, as the committee suggested, will explain the relationship between the athrofa or institute and the tertiary education sector, including MEDR and the Coleg Cymraeg Cenedlaethol. I am acutely aware of the important issues that I haven't had the opportunity to address this afternoon, including certain aspects of the bill itself and further amendments that the government intends to introduce in response to recommendations by the Finance Committee and the Legislation, Justice and Constitution Committee. This can all be seen in the responses provided to those reports, and if the bill does proceed today, then it will be subject to further debate in the Senedd at stages 2 and 3. In order for that to happen, the bill will need support from members to proceed, and in the constructive spirit of the stage 1 reports, I do very much hope that we can do that, and I look forward to further collaboration with all parties during stages 2 and 3.
And I call on the Chair of the Children, Young People and Education Committee, Buffy Williams.
Diolch, Dipper Llywydd. I would like to start by thanking everyone who contributed to our scrutiny of this important bill. Our job as a committee was made easier by the high quality of written and oral evidence that we received. I'd also like to thank the Cabinet Secretary and his officials for their open approach to our scrutiny. My fellow committee members who engaged with the scrutiny with open minds and a willingness to listen to each other and find the places of agreement. And finally, Helydd Fychan and Lee Waters, who joined us from the Culture Committee, a good example of how committees can work together on issues of shared interest. It has been helpful to have the response to our recommendations ahead of the debate. I'm pleased that all 10 recommendations for the Welsh Government have been either fully accepted or accepted in principle. It is rare for a government target, such as the one in Cymraeg 2050, to capture a wider imagination. But 1 million Welsh speakers by 2050 has. Yet the last census result shows a decrease in the number of people saying they are Welsh speakers. It is clear that action is needed to put this decline into reverse. The bill, we believe, will be an important mechanism to support delivery of this target. We are therefore recommending that the Senedd agrees the general principles of the bill. But it will not be easy. It will involve every element of the education system striving with every sinew to deliver. That is the Welsh Government, local authorities, every school in Wales, regardless of its current language category, and all the organisations that support education and the Welsh language. We believe this bill will establish the right architecture, including the introduction of a national framework that will inform local authority and school planning and delivery. The establishment of the National Institute for Learning Welsh will also play a critical role. But the biggest barrier to delivering this bill is having an education workforce with the right language skills across Wales. This is not going to be easy. We know this is not going to be easy. We know there are currently shortages across Wales in a range of subjects, and these shortages are particularly challenging for some subjects in Welsh medium schools. We recommended that the Welsh Government brings forward a statutory education workforce plan, as concerns extend beyond the Welsh language. We are calling for the Welsh Government to identify the most appropriate legislative mechanism to bring this forward, and that it looks at all elements of teacher recruitment and retention rather than looking at one element of the education workforce in isolation. Yesterday, the Cabinet Secretary for Education announced the development of Strategic Education Workforce Plan. In the response to our report, the Welsh Government said this plan will be non-statutory. We have already committed to look at teacher recruitment and retention later this year, and we will be following the development of this plan with close interest. Another big theme throughout our scrutiny was the need for greater clarity on some key issues, including on how the distinction will be made between teaching Welsh as a subject and teaching through the medium of Welsh in the definition of Welsh language education, how much Welsh medium provision is likely in the primarily Welsh language and dual language school categories, what activities will count towards the current 10% minimum of Welsh language provision in primary English language and partly Welsh schools, and the role the tertiary education sector will play in the delivery of the national framework, and how the National Institute will work with the wider tertiary education sector. As that list shows, there is some confusion at the heart of the bill, in particular the definition of Welsh language education and the details around school categories. They are so central to the bill, so greater clarity on these areas before we move to the amending stages will be helpful for all members in considering any potential amendments. In his response, the Cabinet Secretary has committed to providing clarity on these issues in an updated exploratory memorandum, which I welcome. Finally, we ask the Welsh Government to give further consideration to the evidence we heard calling for an additional school category to be added to the bill, which would match the current non-statutory 3P designated Welsh medium category. Could the Cabinet Secretary tell us whether his thinking on this issue has shifted as a result of the evidence we have heard? I look forward to hearing contributions from other members and to continuing with our scrutiny of the bill if the general principles are agreed. Diolch, Deputy Llywelyn.
And I call on the Chair of the Legislation, Justice and Constitution Committee, Mike Hedges.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. The committee's report on the bill was published in December. I thank the Cabinet Secretary for issuing the Government's response to our report in advance of today's debate. The committee's report made 17 recommendations and made one conclusion. I will focus my comments on some of these recommendations. The Cabinet Secretary told us that the Welsh Government had conducted a human rights assessment for the bill. However, the relevant supporting documentation of the bill makes no reference to this, and it was therefore unclear which of the rights in the European Convention of Human Rights were considered by the Welsh Government assessment. We therefore recommend that the Welsh Government outline any assessment made by the Welsh Government of the bill's engagement with the Convention rights. I note the Cabinet Secretary's confirmation in his response that the Welsh Government has considered all the relevant articles of Convention rights. I also note that the Welsh Government considers provisions that are a proportionate means of achieving a legitimate aim, which is to ensure that all pupils reach the end of compulsory school age as independent Welsh language users. We also made a number of recommendations in relation to the use of definitions in the bill. The bill does not include a definition of a Welsh speaker. In the committee's view, leaving out the definition risks undermining how meaningful some of the bill's core provisions will be. We therefore call on the Cabinet Secretary to explain why the common reference level of Welsh language user as set out in the bill had not been used as the basis of individuals to assess their language ability for the purpose of calculating the number of Welsh speakers in Wales. In his response, the Cabinet Secretary told the committee that a common reference level would not be used for this purpose, given that the Welsh Government believes it is up to the individual to decide whether they describe themselves as a Welsh speaker. However, the Government acknowledged that there would inevitably be a connection with the common reference levels over time as the Welsh Government sets Welsh language learning goals for schools. Similarly, the bill used the term Welsh Language Education instead of the more established term Welsh Medium Education. Beyond this, we call on the Cabinet Secretary to share with the committee any assessment undertaken by the Welsh Government on the potential impact this would have on the understanding and accessibility of the law. The Cabinet Secretary told us in his response that the definition is unambiguous. However, in light of the committee's recommendations, the Welsh Government intends to introduce an amendment during Stage 2 to make it clear that the definition of Welsh language education means education and training through school lessons. The committee is broadly content with the balance between what is on the face of the bill and what is left to subordinate legislation. It also broadly welcomes the level of detail provided in the statement of policy intent. However, the committee questioned the Welsh Government's taking of regulation-making powers in order to future-proof legislation and called on the Cabinet Secretary to explain why the bill does not include some provisions on its face. In particular, we called on the Cabinet Secretary to explain what type of further provision regulation of subsection 1 of section 13 of the bill could include and recommend that the Cabinet Secretary consider which further limitations may be placed on the power within this section. We note the Cabinet Secretary's response that although it is premature to give a comprehensive list of what could be included in regulations under this section, it could be used to make provisions for how schools should categorise themselves during a transitional period. In addition, the committee raised concerns about the Henry VIII powers in subsection 9 of section 23 of the bill, which enables the Welsh Minister to amend its subsections of 3 to 7. The committee viewed this as to be an inappropriate delegation of power and recommended the bill should be amended to include a duty for the Welsh Minister to consult before laying regulations under section 23 of the bill. In addition, we recommend that the bill should also be amended to require that regulations made under that section must not be made until 60 days have elapsed since the laying of the draft regulation. We note the Welsh Government has rejected these two recommendations. Finally, the Government has also recommended that the Welsh Government should consider amending the bill to include further information about the joint local Welsh in-school education strategic plans to provide more certainty and improve accessibility. We note that the Welsh Government believes that there is no need to amend the bill, but will provide further information in the bill's supporting documentation. Diolch.
And I now call on the Chair of the Finance Committee, Peredur Owen Griffiths.
Thank you, Dipolwywydd, and I welcome the opportunity to participate in today's debate. In our report, we came to 2 conclusions and we made 6 recommendations. I'm pleased that the Cabinet Secretary has accepted 5 of our recommendations, but we're disappointed with his rejection of 1 recommendation, which I will turn to later in my contribution. We welcome and support the bill's overall purpose of contributing to the Welsh Government's target of ensuring 1 million Welsh speakers in Wales by 2050. However, we have noted a few specific issues for the Cabinet Secretary's consideration with the aim of improving the financial information published alongside this bill. We are broadly content with the financial implications of the bill, and we agree with the approach to providing the cost estimates as precise figures as opposed to a range of figures, given the wide variation of costs arising from the bill. And this is a positive approach and one that the committee supports. However, it is disappointing that on this occasion, the Welsh Government has not followed its own best practice guidance by including the cost-benefit analysis for all of the options outlined in the Regulatory Impact Assessment, the RIA. This makes it difficult to undertake full and robust scrutiny of the financial implications of bills. We therefore recommended that analysis for all options under consideration by the Welsh Government should be included in RIAs as a matter of course. It is therefore regrettable that the Cabinet Secretary has rejected this recommendation, particularly as the committee was merely reminding the government to follow its own best practice in this instance. We're also concerned that no modelling exercise was undertaken as part of the school workforce development activity, and that further information is needed before the Welsh Government can provide more accurate cost estimates, in our view. We asked for confirmation of when this data will be available, and I'm pleased that the Cabinet Secretary has confirmed that these figures will be included in the first national framework. We note that the bill contains provisions for the introduction of regulations that will be subject to the draft affirmative procedure. However, the costs arising from such regulations have not been included in the RIA for this bill. And whilst we note the Welsh Government's commitment to publishing an impact assessment for any such regulations, we are concerned that there is limited time available to scrutinise the costs of such regulations. Members will be aware that this is not the first time that we have raised concerns about the lack of cost estimates associated with provisions in Senedd bills that are exercised by delegated powers, and as such we recommend that RIAs should include a best estimate of the costs and benefits associated with subordinate legislation alongside the relevant primary legislation. I welcome the fact that the Cabinet Secretary is committed to produce RIAs for each set of regulations, as this will be essential to enabling us to understand the financial impact of the bill as a whole. And we support the provisions within the bill that allow for collaborative working across schools in developing their Welsh language educational delivery plans. And this will help to ensure that resources are used wisely and might result in some cost savings. In addition, the bill also creates a new statutory body, namely the National Institute for Learning Welsh. We note that the RIA assumes that the Institute will become operational when the current funding agreement from the Welsh Government for the National Centre for Learning Welsh comes to an end. However, there is a difference in the costs estimated for the Institute in comparison to the Centre for the same time period, should this bill not be agreed. We have asked the Welsh Government to provide an updated RIA at stage 2 to provide a full breakdown of the costs associated with the Institute and its costs and how they compared with those for the Centre. And I welcome the fact that the Cabinet Secretary has agreed to provide this. Our next recommendation again relates to the need for more modelling to be included within the RIA, this time in relation to language immersion courses. We acknowledge that immersion is a relatively new approach and that the number of those undertaking immersion courses has grown significantly. These factors could make it difficult for the Welsh Government to provide cost estimates. However, we are of the view that the RAA could have included some modelling in this area, which would have provided an estimate of costs based on different scenarios of growth. As such, we recommend that the RAA is amended after Stage 2 to provide cost estimates related to increased demand for language immersion courses. And again, I welcome the fact that the Cabinet Secretary will provide these figures within an updated RAA. Our final recommendations, I am coming to an end on this. Our final recommendation relates to the post-implementation review. I've spoken in this chamber on numerous occasions about the importance of such reviews to ensure the objectives of legislation are being delivered in line with expectations and that value for money has been achieved. We therefore welcome the inclusion of the post-implementation review and affordability assessment in this bill. We also welcome the Welsh Government's commitment to assessing the overall costs of the change during the review period. In particular, we recommend that this review assesses the overall costs and benefits of the new consenting regime and whether this meets the expectations as set out in the RAA. We welcome the fact that the Cabinet Secretary is committed to doing this, and we look forward to seeing the outcome of the review once the bill has been implemented. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Director Lewis, and thank you, Cabinet Secretary, for discussing this with me earlier today. I very much appreciate that. Myself and my party welcome the ambition to increase the number of Welsh speakers in Wales. As a Welsh speaker myself, I am passionate about seeing more people using the language in their daily lives. Although we support the general principles of the bill, effective legislation requires detailed scrutiny in order to ensure that it delivers its objectives. I appreciate the work done by 3 committees in drawing up their reports, and I welcome the government's commitment to address their recommendations. However, key challenges remain, particularly in terms of workforce capacity. The Cabinet Secretary highlighted the specific need for a workforce that can deliver the changes put forward in this bill. The recent statement by the Education Minister on developing an education workforce plan is a step forward, but that plan should have been developed alongside this bill, given how closely aligned the two things are. Also, there was no mention of the Welsh language in the statement issued yesterday. I welcome the Stage 2 amendment proposed to place a duty on ministers to set out steps for the development of an adequate workforce to teach through the medium of Welsh. This is crucially important as recruitment and retention issues, particularly in mainly non-Welsh speaking areas, threaten the success of the bill. I also note the government's intention to explain the term Welsh education and to provide further detail on language provision in the different school categories. This clarity is crucially important, as Estyn and others have warned that terms such as primarily English language, some Welsh, do threaten to confuse parents and hinder attempts to enhance Welsh medium education. It is encouraging to hear that more explanatory materials will be produced and that amendments will address concerns about those pupils in mainly Welsh language schools. Transport to Welsh medium schools continues to be a major barrier, particularly in rural and deprived areas. The success of the bill relies on tackling these logistical challenges, and this issue hasn't been adequately addressed to date. Learner travel is crucial in order to enhance access to Welsh medium education, and I encourage the government to ensure that this is prioritised in the regulation and related policy frameworks. Finally, we cannot ignore the financial implications. It's unlikely that the current Welsh Language and Education grant of £6.7 million will be adequate to deliver the ambitious aims of the bill. Schools and local authorities are already stretched, as was highlighted by the head of Olchfa School in Swansea, who warned that something else will have to miss out. I wonder if the Cabinet Secretary could set out what that may be. To conclude, I support the general principles of the bill and welcome the commitment to strengthen our linguistic heritage. However, I will be submitting my own amendments to tackle some of the main concerns as I see them. I am pleased that the Welsh language continues to be a unifying topic within this Senedd, and I look forward to further collaboration in order to deliver meaningful and comprehensive outcomes for Welsh medium education and the Welsh language. Kevin Campbell.
Thank you very much, Dr Lywydd, and thank you to the Cabinet Secretary for introducing the first stage of the Welsh Language and Education Bill. A quarter of a century since the Senedd was opened, it is hugely disappointing that the majority of children and young people in Wales continue to be deprived through our education system of the opportunity to speak and use the Welsh language. And that's why it's so important that we legislate in this area. Now, as the Cabinet Secretary said in introducing the bill, this bill was originally introduced following the publication of a white paper last year as part of the cooperation agreement between the government and Plaid Cymru. And for the record, I would like to note, of course, that I was part of those discussions at the time as the designated member. But, of course, the bill in its current form was introduced after the agreement came to an end. And I have to say that the ambitions of the current bill are lower in terms of what I would want it to achieve. And in some sections, I'm afraid that it appears that the government has rowed back on some elements of the original white paper. As we've already heard, the Children and Young People Committee has been hearing evidence from a very wide range of stakeholders during the oral evidence sessions, all of whom welcomed the general principles of the bill and supported the main policy objectives of achieving at least 1 million Welsh speakers by 2050 and developing an education system that ensures that every pupil becomes a confident Welsh speaker by the end of their statutory education. Now, with regard to those who've questioned whether the bill and its provisions are a priority in the face of other educational challenges, I am certainly of the view that we must act now to reverse what we've seen over the past few decades, namely a decline in the number and percentage of people in Wales who are able to speak Welsh, and that is the cause of great concern for all of us. Other than language transmission in the home, the education system is the most effective method of growing and developing language skills and of encouraging growth in the use of the Welsh language in the community. So there's no doubt as to whether the bill and its provisions should be a priority for us here at the Senedd. But I do want to strike a very serious note. We have seen commitments from government over the years in various strategies to grow Welsh medium education that have failed completely. We cannot continue this practice of announcing plans that fail to deliver their key objective of enabling every child to become a confident Welsh speaker through the education system. For over 20 years, non-statutory national targets set by the government to expand Welsh medium education have been missed. This includes the Iaith Pawb target in 2003, over 20 years ago, the National Welsh Language Education Strategy in 2010, and the Cymraeg 2050 targets announced in 2017. And where has that left us? Well, if we look at the situation over the past decade alone, in 2014, 21.9% of primary school pupils received their education through the medium of Welsh. Now, by 2024, 10 years later, the equivalent percentage was 22.5%, a very small increase of just 0.6 5% over a decade. And over the same period, for pupils in secondary schools, the percentage of those receiving their education through the medium of Welsh has decreased from 14% to 13.5%. And it is therefore clear that the current system must be transformed to drive significant growth in Welsh medium education and a fundamental change in the way that Welsh is taught in English medium schools. And central to all of this, of course, is the workforce. And it was disappointing to read the response of the Cabinet Secretary of the Welsh Language to the committee's recommendation on including a commitment to develop a bilingual workforce as part of the bill. And then came, as we've already heard, a written statement by the Education Secretary yesterday that ignored this matter entirely. There was no reference at all to the Welsh language or to developing a bilingual workforce in that statement. But I'm pleased that we've received an explanation from the Cabinet Secretary that there will be a commitment to that forthcoming. So one perhaps loses confidence in seeing statements like this. So to conclude, with, in my view, we must strengthen several aspects of the bill, but despite this, the general principles are to be welcomed as a starting point. And Plaid Cymru will be voting in favour of those general principles this afternoon. But to be clear, we will be taking every opportunity of the weeks and months to come to table amendments to ensure that every child in Wales has the opportunity to become a confident Welsh speaker.
Thank you very much, Dirprwy. Now, perhaps I'm going to take a slightly different tone to Kevin Campbell because I'm an optimist. I was when I was a minister standing here introducing the target of 1 million Welsh speakers, and I'm an optimist today that that is a possibility, but it is a challenge. It's a challenge for each and every one of us, and it's a challenge for government, but it is a challenge for us as a nation too. It's a challenge for all of us, because the million people who will be speaking the Welsh language aren't million people who appear in a minister's speech or a speech given by the opposition. It'll be 1 million people who live in Wales, 1 million people who choose to use and speak the Welsh language. And I think that that's important because whatever legislation we put in place here, we can't legislate to require anyone to speak any language. You can't force me to speak Welsh with my son when Cardiff City are losing once again. We can't legislate to insist that I use the Welsh language when I'm trying to persuade my boy to do his homework. We have to persuade people, and we have to show the possibilities and the opportunities that arise from using the Welsh language. I welcome the opportunity to join the committee, and I appreciate the work done by the chair in leading the scrutiny work on this particular piece of legislation. And when I scrutinise legislation, we don't do enough of it here on occasion, but you do appreciate that stage one, that first phase of the legislative process, because that's when the public speak. That's when the people of Wales have an opportunity to express a view on the legislation that we passed here. It doesn't happen in Westminster. And I do think that that first stage in our legislative process is extremely important, and we often forget that. But I learned a great deal by being involved with the committee. I learnt about the pressures on teachers and the pressures in the education system. It taught me about the importance of bringing people with us to speak to our fellow Welsh people about these opportunities and objectives, and how we can then achieve that target of 1 million Welsh speakers through persuasion and through highlighting the opportunities provided by the Welsh language, which belongs to all of us, and that is something that should be welcomed in all of our communities. And I am particularly pleased at the moment to see the first Welsh medium school being built in Tredegar. When I was at school, of course, there was no Welsh provided in school. When my father was in school, the situation was the same. When my grandmother was at school, they weren't allowed to speak Welsh. So in a century, we've overturned the situation in Tredegar, and that's what I want to see happening across the nation. And we learnt a great deal during this scrutiny of the legislation, and I would like to ask the Cabinet Secretary to consider some sections of the legislation to see whether we can improve the bill. And I do think that the bill does provide important improvements to the current system, I have to say that. But to be entirely honest with you, and I didn't want to say this at the time, but when I was Minister with responsibility for the Welsh language, I'm still not sure that I understand all of the school categories that we have. And they categorise how the Welsh language is delivered in every school. I think on occasion we complicate things too much. And I would like to ask the Minister to look again at some of the categories that we do have and what that means for pupils, teachers and communities. And this isn't an important point in the bigger picture, but it is important that we can differentiate between Welsh education and education through the medium of Welsh. And I think that education through the medium of Welsh has been very successful, and the growth in Welsh medium education has been very important. And people understand that, and people understand what it means. So I don't think I want to see us moving away from that definition. I also want to understand, Minister, how the Welsh language education continuum that we've been discussing over a number of years now fits into this new regime. What does that mean in the new system that we are putting in place through this bill? And I will conclude with two brief points. When we set the target, we used the census to measure the number of Welsh speakers, and I thought that was important. The government is now introducing the new CEFA. Now, I didn't understand this before we started our work on the bill. Now, I welcome that, but I would like to understand how that will guide government policy. And the final thing I want to say is to return to the point of promoting the Welsh language. How can we promote the Welsh language? And how can the government ensure that people have the opportunity wherever they live to enjoy the Welsh language? And on occasion, I'm concerned about the tone. You do have to conclude now, Alan. But I do think that when I was learning Welsh, I learned Welsh through enjoying myself as a student at college in Aberystwyth. So how can we now persuade children, teenagers and young people to use the Welsh language when we all know that the obvious choice for all of us is to turn to English? So we have to think about how we can promote the Welsh language and ensure that people use the Welsh language without having been forced to do so. Heledd Vychan.
Thank you, Dyprylywydd. I'm an optimist too, Alan Davis, but I don't think that we're coming from different directions on this, because it's not a matter of compulsion. It's about giving an opportunity to everyone, and that opportunity doesn't currently exist. We're talking about choice. The Welsh language belongs to all of us. The things that are said all the time now. But the Welsh language doesn't currently belong to everyone, because when I go to schools in my region, it's a very different story from school to school. I'm delighted, as a number of you will be, meeting with young people, hearing their views. But many who are 16, 17 years of age are cross that they've reached the age that they have reached, that the Senedd has existed since they were born, and they don't have the language. They feel that they can't speak Welsh, and perhaps now they want, as they are 16, 17, they are learning the language on Duolingo, but they are in the education system now. They should be able to access and speak the Welsh language. So solutions are offered in this bill. I agree, of course, with Kevin Campbell. It doesn't go far enough yet, and there is work that will need to be done to strengthen it. But the choice isn't there at the moment, and we do have to be honest about about that and the opportunities to enjoy the Welsh language. All of the things that Alan Davies spoke about, that isn't available to everyone at the moment. So how do we ensure that those opportunities are available? Because when you do have that opportunity, children, young people flourish. Yes, I'm happy to take an intervention.
I'm learning Welsh. And you see, language is the heart of the nation. Language dies, nation dies. So if that is our, message to the public, to people, I'm sure they all will be speaking Welsh. Thank you.
Gwych.
Excellent. Well, there is no better way of describing it. And certainly one of the things that is perhaps missing as we discuss this bill is that we're not just talking about education here. And I do regret through the scrutiny process that we didn't truly have an opportunity to look at the other elements related to the use of the language. And I look forward as the bill makes progress in terms of how we can focus more on those issues, because this is a lifelong bill. It's about the Welsh language being alive and relevant in your life, regardless of your age. And that's why I welcome the establishment of a system to describe ability to the Welsh language, because that's a weakness in the census, isn't it? Because people feel that they aren't confident enough to define themselves as a Welsh speaker. So having a framework will help people, hopefully. I don't know how often you've had the experience of having a job applicant who says that they don't have Welsh language skills, but I know that people have those skills. You can have a conversation with them, but because they feel that their Welsh isn't perfect, they don't feel that they can write on a form that they can speak the Welsh language, which means that they often don't have an opportunity to go to interview. So hopefully this will be of assistance for them too. People who are applying for jobs where the Welsh language is desirable or essential, that they do feel then that they can apply. So what I would like to ask the Cabinet Secretary, there is one thing that continues to concern me, namely this bilingual category. It's one school in Wales that has this model at present. I am open-minded about the model, but in terms of the research basis that this is a model that is going to work for Wales, this dual language model, I do have concerns. So I do hope that we will have an opportunity to see how this can work. We have to be honest at the moment. There are some decisions funded by the government that have a negative impact on the Welsh language. I'm talking here about new schools and so on. That can have an impact. And the fact that this bill will ensure that schools can't change language category to downgrade the category, that is to be welcomed. I do want to pursue one point that Samuel Kurtz raised in terms of transport too, because this is a vitally important matter. That is a barrier at the moment. We know that people are making the choice to go for English medium education rather than Welsh because of transport. So it's not a matter of people choosing Welsh or not. It's not a choice if there isn't transport available. So I would like to know how the government intends to tackle this issue. So there are a number of very positive aspects to the bill, but we do have to be honest. This isn't about choice. It's about equal opportunity for everyone to be able to speak the language of our nation. That it's about bringing Wales closer to the world, because bilingualism, multilingualism are normal in other nations. So can we move this debate forward? That some continue to be negative about the Welsh language. Yes, well, there'll be dinosaurs in future as we provide the confident opportunity for everyone to become Welsh speakers.
Diolch, Deirdre Llywedd. I must say I'm a little struck by the tone of the debate being markedly different from the tone in the committee, and perhaps that's just the nature of the temperature in the chamber versus the temperature in the committee room, because I was pleased to be part of the committee process because I thought it was very good scrutiny and it was cross-party consensual scrutiny, and we all genuinely looked at those areas where we could find common ground, and we had some very high-quality sessions with the Cabinet Secretary where we discussed both the principle and the detail of the proposed legislation. So I've come out of that process feeling quite optimistic myself about our ability as a Senedd to make policy in what is a very difficult and challenging area. Let us not underestimate how ambitious a bill this is, and to give full credit to Plaid Cymru, because were it not for the cooperation agreement, this bill wouldn't have come forward, and obviously it's gone through with agreement, and this is something we all sign up to. But that is something I think they can take great pride in getting us to this state and getting in law the 2050 1 million Welsh speakers target, which, when you put it in the context of the global position of minority languages are hugely fragile around the world. And what we're trying to do here is, I think, a uniquely ambitious and challenging agenda of trying to reverse that trend. And it is not easy. And I think we should take some comfort for the fact that it is hard, but that we are doing it together and that we are ambitious for it. This inevitably is a bill that focuses on the education system. But this is not primarily an education problem. This is a cultural policy where we're asking the education system to deliver for us, and the education system is being asked also by us to deliver lots of other things, and that puts huge strain on the education system and on the workforce, and I think we should recognise the challenges that present. And I was very pleased to see a slightly less sour note than Kevin Campbell, a written statement on Monday by the Cabinet Secretary for Education on the commitment to develop a workforce plan, which was a recommendation of the committee report. Not just the Welsh language workforce, the whole workforce, because we recognise there are a range of pressures, but obviously the Welsh language workforce is critical to that, and I'm pleased to note the Cabinet Secretary's reassurances on that as well. But we do absolutely rely on the workforce, and particularly in those schools that are primarily English medium at the moment. And those are the children, I think, who are being the shortchanged the greatest in this great cultural agenda of ours, because frankly, if you go to an English medium school, your chance of coming out at the end of it being able to have a meaningful conversation in Welsh is quite low. And what it also does is breed a resentment and bitterness amongst many pupils who go to the school that they've had a poor quality education and a poor experience, and they don't understand why they're being subjected to this. And I've had many conversations with young people in Llanelli who reflect that, and I must say it's really disheartening. So it's essential that we focus on the quality of English medium provision and the quality of the whole system to get us up to the common standard. So I'm very pleased with the progress that we've been able to make through cooperation and getting us to this point. I just want to focus a little bit on one element of the bill, and namely that section 5, the new standardised framework for describing Welsh language ability, the so-called CEFR, the Common European Framework of Reference for Languages, a Council of Europe framework which is used around the world that hitherto has not been widely adopted in our country. But I think it's a very positive development. It's used in the Basque Country and in Finland, and it sets categories of language development, which puts it on a spectrum and a continuum, which I think is very healthy. And it talks of a basic level, which it calls A1 and A2. It then moves up to what it categorises as the independent user, B1 and B2, and then finally a proficient user, a C1 and C2. And I must say, I think it's really positive to move away from the previous binary categorisation we had of a confident or a fluent speaker and a learner, which I've always found very unsettling. Dwi ddim yn aml yn siarad Cymraeg yn y siambr.
I don't often speak Welsh in the chamber because I'm not confident enough, and I don't feel that I can say in a formal setting the things I want to say in the way I want to say them. But I remember going to Nant Gwrtheyrn for a period, and I had a conversation with a gentleman from America and one from Australia who'd learnt Welsh superbly, and we were playing Monopoly together. And I spoke to both of them the whole time through the medium of Welsh, and I explained to them how the census worked in Wales and the fact that people such as myself don't describe ourselves in the census as fluent speakers. And I remember them telling me, well, what do you mean? You've spoken to us only in Welsh. What's wrong? And I realised that they were absolutely right. But there is a barrier, there's a psychological barrier that we have. And I do think that the way that we thought about the Welsh language in terms of defining them as learners and fluent speakers didn't help. And I remember people saying when I was growing up, well, he speaks like a learner. And this is entirely unhelpful.
This framework, it moves us away from that sense of a binary distinction, and I think it'll help employers, it'll help people with their own baggage and their own journey as a Welsh speaker to recognise we can all speak some Welsh and we can all speak a little bit more, and we are all Welsh speakers because we are a nation, and together this is a unique characteristic we must must cherish. And I think this bill is an important step forward. Diolch yn fawr.
And I call on the Cabinet Secretary for the Finance and Welsh Language to reply to the debate. Well, thank you very much, Dipolywyd. Thank you to everyone who's contributed to today's debate, a very interesting debate and a constructive one. And thank you to everyone who has said from every party that they are going to support the bill to move forward after stage 1. I agree with what Alan Davis said when I read the reports emerging from stage 1 over Christmas. What struck me was the quality of the debate behind the committee's work and the committee's reports. And I believe that that has been reflected on the floor of the Senedd this afternoon. In the debate around the bill, you can hear issues being discussed on the floor of the Senedd this afternoon. On the one hand, Sam Kurt made a constructive contribution, started with the challenges that lie behind the bill. And the bill is challenging, and the bill will be challenging in some parts of Wales. That's why we are going to be doing work together to put the system in place where every part of Wales can use the bill. And on one hand, it is challenging. On the other hand, Kevin Campbell said that the bill isn't sufficiently ambitious, and the committee had heard from people on all sides of the debate. Some said that it was too challenging, some said that it was too ambitious. I believe that the bill is ambitious. It's ambitious for every child here in Wales. And as Lee Waters said, we've succeeded and had a great deal of success here in Wales in growing education through the medium of Welsh and the quality of education that people receive when they go through that system. And just to say once again this afternoon, that is the government ambition too, to increase the percentage of children who receive their education through the medium of the Welsh language. But on the other hand, the majority of children in Wales who receive their education through the medium of English, it has been mandatory for them to learn Welsh for decades now. But we know that we haven't succeeded in providing the same quality of experiences to them. And that's what the bill seeks to address, to bring every child in Wales into the system where everyone can emerge from it at the end, being able to speak Welsh confidently and feeling that the experiences that they've received in education are experiences that are going to be useful to them, and to enjoy the Welsh language, as Alan Davies said, through doing it in that way and studying it in that way. I look forward to having more opportunities during stage 2 and stage 3 to respond to some of the details that people have raised this afternoon.
Waters' point that the CEFR is a major development of our thinking here in Wales, moving us away from that very unhelpful binary. Are you a Welsh speaker or are you not? And I think this will be really helpful in the workplace as well. We will see in future jobs advertised that don't have to choose between Welsh essential and Welsh desirable, but we'll be able to say we're looking for someone who can speak Welsh at level C3, C2, whatever it would be, that matches the level of Welsh that someone has with the nature of the job that they will be undertaking. And I think, while Mike Hedges made the point that in the end the government has stuck to a basic principle that it's not for the government to decide whether somebody is a Welsh speaker or not. In Wales, it is for the individual in the end to make that judgment. But the common European framework will allow people to make that judgment about themselves, secure that you are using a system that other people recognise and is a shared sense of what to be a Welsh speaker in Wales in different contexts will be. There are many more aspects of the bill that we will discuss, I'm sure, during cyfnod 2 a cyfnod.
During stages 2 and 3, I look forward. One of the things that we have succeeded in doing, and it is crucially important, I think, is to keep the language on the floor of the Senedd. There's a topic that is of importance to us across parties. Every party here wants to see the Welsh language prospering in future, and through working in that way, we can see a way forward, a way that is optimistic, a way that can provide more opportunities and more confidence for people in Wales in future to keep the language alive, to keep the language as something that we use every day, keeping the language as something that is important to us as a nation. The bill is one way of helping us to do that. I'm very grateful to everyone who's contributed to the debate and look forward to working with people when the bill goes through the Senedd. Thank you very much.